Welcome to the Truth and Liberty broadcast. We believe we have a mandate to bring godly change to our nation and the world through the 7 spheres or mountains of influence. To further this cause, we give away a product every week that will empower you to get involved in changing your life and changing our world. You can register for our weekly giveaway by subscribing at truthandliberty.net. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to receive weekly updates on guests, news, and much more. This is an interactive live cast, and we welcome your questions. To ask a question during the live cast, use the comment or chat features. Now get ready to dive into this week's topics with our hosts on location in Colorado, USA.
Hello and welcome to the Truth and Liberty Livecast. I'm Richard Harris, and I am just so glad that you are joining us tonight. It's so great to have all of you watching, and I'm really excited also tonight to have Karen Conrad helping me host tonight. Karen is awesome. You regular viewers, you know Karen. She used to be my boss here at AWM and was actually one of the founders of Truth and Liberty, and I'm going to hand it over to her in a second. We have as our special guest tonight, we're so honored and blessed to have Cathy Ruse joining us, and I'll give Cathy a proper introduction in a second, but this is going to be a great live cast tonight because we're going to be talking about a subject that is a little bit uncomfortable. People don't really like to get into the nitty-gritty on this subject, but it goes to the heart and soul of our country and the future of our nation, as we're going to be talking about the LGBT agenda that's going on in our public schools and how our kids are being indoctrinated in that destructive and immoral and ungodly lifestyle. So we have an expert with us in Cathy Ruse. But before we get into all that, I want to hand it over to Karen. And Karen's got some announcements and that sort of thing. So Karen, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. And welcome everybody to the Truth and Liberty Livecast. It's going to be a great evening. And I'll tell you, I'm so amazed at all the things, Richard, that you are doing at Truth and Liberty to keep people updated. And we first and foremost want to remind everybody that we've got an amazing website. It's truthandliberty.net. And I know many of you are watching this broadcast on truthandliberty.net. But if you are watching by social media, we just encourage you to go to the website to view this program. Not only will you have uninterrupted viewing, but you will have access to so much information, including links on, I just see you updated, Trump's accomplishments by the Liberty Council. Andrew did a podcast with 1 million voices that you'll be able to catch on the website. Also a podcast by Matt Staver and Dr. Simone Gold. This is really interesting. Why is hydroxychloroquine being censored? We share with you how to get voting assistance, how to find out who to vote for and get a handle on the issues. It's like a 24-hour news feed. So go to truthandliberty.net. Also, we have so many events that are always happening at Charis Bible College and Andrew Womack Ministries. I know we just came out of an identity conference, which looked amazing. I caught a little bit of that this weekend. We also have the Ministers Conference that's coming up on October 5th through the 9th. We've got Andrew, Greg Moore, Pastor Bob Yandian, Dwayne Sheriff, Barry Bennett, Carrie Pickett. So if you are a licensed minister, you are eligible to attend this event and just get stirred up in the Lord and refreshed. And you can register at awmi.net/events. And then this event I'm really excited about is called Women's Arise. It's November 5th through the 7th. And I actually have the privilege and honor of speaking at this event along with Tracy Asia, Sue Nutman, and Audrey Mack. And I just want to encourage you ladies, the Lord has given me a very, very special message that I will be talking about at this event. So join us on November 5th through the 7th, and you can register at awmi.net/events. And then we've got the Heart of Christmas. I love this musical. It's just like part of the tradition of Christmas time, and you're so blessed if you're in the Colorado area to attend this live. It's December 11th through the 13th, and Robert and Elizabeth Mirren do an amazing job with this musical, and you can get your tickets at awmi.net/events. One of the very special things about this live cast is it's interactive. We want to hear from you. So you're able to ask questions and we answer as many of them as possible. If you are watching on truthandliberty.net or awmi.net, go ahead and enter those questions into the chat section. We've got a whole team standing by that sends those questions forward to us. If you're watching on social media, simply enter your question in on the comments. Also, let us know what's going on with you. We love to hear from you and just see how things are going, and let us know where you're tuning in from tonight. Also, we get to give away a gift every week on Truth and Liberty. And the way that you're eligible for this gift is simply to subscribe to truthandliberty.net. And I want to congratulate last week's winner, Thomas Truebottom. I hope I said that correctly, Thomas. And you won Grace, the Power of the Gospel, which is autographed by Andrew. And this week's product is How to Find, Follow, and Fulfill God's Will for Your Life, also autographed by Andrew. And I'll tell you, this was one of the most popular series when I worked at Andrew Womack Ministries. We'd get questions in the phone center because people wanted to know how to hear the voice of God and find His will. This is the best product out there for you to learn how to do that. And again, to be eligible for that, simply subscribe, or if you're already subscribed at truthandliberty.net, you're entered into the drawing. We want to remind you that this is a viewer-supported live cast. Truth and Liberty is a 501c4, and we depend on your donations to help fund getting the word out at this very critical time. So if you are interested in giving, it's not tax deductible. I always remind people that you're sowing amazing seed and you can trust God for that harvest. And you can go ahead and donate at truthandliberty.net/donate. Also, we've got a team of prayer ministers and customer service representatives. If you have any question about the ministry, if you need prayer for something, we're going to be talking about some topics tonight that are really difficult, as Richard said, but very, very important, particularly as parents and grandparents. And we want to help you to sort through that. We want to pray with you. You can call 719-635-1111. And with that, I'm so excited to turn it back over to Richard, and we'll introduce our wonderful guest.
Thank you, Karen. Well, there's so many awesome things going on here at AWM and Charis Bible College and Truth and Liberty every day. It's such a blessing. But I tell you what, I am excited about tonight's live cast. You'd think, well, how can you get excited about this issue? And I'll tell you why, is because it's such a need in our culture. And to have someone who is so well qualified and articulate as Cathy Ruse to be joining us to address this, that gets me excited. I think it's awesome. So, Cathy, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be with you.
Well, Cathy, you are the Senior Fellow and Director of Human Dignity at Family Research Council. And did I get that right? I didn't know if you're...
You did.
Okay, yeah. Excellent. Well, FRC just put on the Values Voter Summit this last week, and it was a virtual summit, smashing success from everything I could tell.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it was the first time we had to do it online, but we're all learning what life is like that, hopefully temporarily, but it was a great success. Yes, thanks be to God.
Well,
yeah.
And for everybody who's watching, if you didn't get a chance to see that, I bet you could probably find the archive version somewhere, maybe on FRC's website or go to ours, but it's definitely worth watching. Some powerful stuff on there. Andrew spoke. We had a breakout session and everything. But Cathy, I'd like our viewers to get to know you a little bit. I was reading over your bio, and it is very impressive, starting off with being a Georgetown Law School graduate, and it looks to me like you've spent your career advocating and standing up in the public square for really the civil rights, if you will, but more specifically the life of the unborn. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's what really motivated me to get into public policy. I always wanted to work in the pro-life movement, to use my law degree somehow to protect unborn children and to stop the massacre and also the destruction of women. So I've had the great honor to be able to work professionally in that field in a number of different arenas. I was on the Hill for several years as chief counsel of the Constitution Subcommittee, and that's where we passed pro-life legislation on the House side. So one of my very first acts there was to be a counsel for one of the partial birth abortion ban measures, not the one that ultimately was signed into law. This was under Bill Clinton, who kept vetoing that bill. But so I was able to do that policy work. I've been at Family Research Council for 20 years, working on a number of issues, but really the precious dignity of that innocent unborn life and what abortion does to women really motivated me to pursue a policy career with my law degree. And I have been, as I say, it's an honor and a great glory to be able to work for God's kingdom on these issues.
Well, thank you for that. Well, I met you at our Truth and Liberty Coalition conference, which we held here in June. And I was hoping the whole time to get some time to sit down and visit with you. I didn't get that chance, but what brought you to my attention was a booklet that FRC published back in the spring. And it's called Sex Education in Public Schools, Sexualization of Children and LGBT Indoctrination. And I think we've got that available actually on our website. And so
Great.
Everybody that's watching, if you go to the truthandliberty.net website and go to our resources page and then scroll down, and you'll see a whole section there on LGBT agenda, and that booklet is right there for a free download. I bet you could also get it on the FRC website. Is that right, Cathy?
Absolutely. frc.org/sex education. That's where you find it.
When I read that booklet, I was just impressed I came away with one thought, and that was this book needs to be in the hands of every school board member in America. And it's that powerful, that compelling, really kind of shocking, actually, when you read through it. How did you come to be involved in that issue, going from life into what's happening with the LGBT agenda?
Well, I'll tell you. As you know, I've been at Family Research Council for many, many years. And my colleague, Peter Sprigg, who for years ago was and still is really our expert on LGBTQ research and where the medical field is and all of that. And we used to kind of almost tease him like, oh, you're the guy that has to handle all that stuff. We're doing other things over here like pro-life work and religious liberty. Well, when marriage came under attack in the United States, when man-woman marriage came under attack in the United States, we were all drafted into working on defending marriage, God's plan for marriage. So that's when I got involved with this issue. And then, of course, once you're there, and we lost the marriage debate, as you know, in the Supreme Court. And they imposed a new definition of marriage on the country. And then the LGBT lobby went on to their next big issue, which is the transgender issue, which we'll be talking about tonight because it's affecting schools and school children. So it's kind of an all hands on deck. And I'm glad you asked, how did I transition? Because there was another transition for me as well that I'd like to share with you. And that is, I had been working on the federal national policy level my whole career, really, trying to help shape policies so that it's pro-family, so that Christian families can flourish in our country based on what's happening at the federal level. And I had really not paid close attention to what was happening right down the street at my local school board. My kids didn't go to public schools. They go to a private Christian school. So it just wasn't on my radar until I heard that my school board had passed a new policy by a vote of 11-1 to allow boys into the girls' bathrooms in our schools in Fairfax County, Virginia. And that got my attention. And that I resolved to find out who that one board member was so I could thank her, it was a woman, and to find out, well, what is going on with my school board. And I did. I started attending school board meetings, and I was absolutely shocked to find out what these parents and grandparents were were doing, they were begging every 2 weeks when there was a school board meeting, they were begging the school to stop sexualizing the children. They were begging them to stop assigning pornographic reading material to children. And ultimately, the largest threat to children was this new threat of transgender ideology, that the schools were starting to introduce the idea to children that they could possibly be born in the wrong body, that little boys actually might truly be little girls inside. You know, a terrible, destructive, horrifying, and false message. Sorry.
No, that's okay. We're getting a little bit of feedback here.
All right.
From Karen's mic, I think so, but that's okay. You're talking about how horrified you were from your experience at the local school board meetings.
Right. Well, and that's thank you. My takeaway was that here I had spent all this time at the federal level, where these local school boards are transforming the next generation of Americans, and our side wasn't even showing up to fight. This was we talk about spiritual battles. Well, this is truly a spiritual battle, and they're going after our children, and we're not there to fight. I mean, there were some of us there, was a handful of us there, but it matters tremendously what happens at the local school level. And President Trump just recently said, I was so happy to hear him mention the fact that the violence, the unrest, the riots are directly related to what children are taught in school about hating America and about just being confused about their own identity. So that was my point. He didn't mention the identity, but of course I know a lot about what's going on in public schools on the idea of LGBT identity and transgender identity. And that's just by virtue of Family Research Council. We get calls constantly from parents from all across the country. And we were getting more and more calls on this issue from desperate parents. What do we do? How do we fight the school board? How do we protect kids? That we decided we've got to collect all of this, put it in a resource, give action steps, and just explain really the strategy that we've learned that the sexual nihilists are employing to transform the next generation of American children.
Wow. Well, Cathy, I've got 100 questions bouncing around in my head right now, but I want to, before we go any further, can you just kind of give an overview of this booklet on the sexualization of our kids? What is it that people can expect to get from that?
Yep. Well, they will get they'll get a sample of actual sex ed lessons that we have learned about and researched and found from all over the country. Just kind of a little sample. So we have California, Illinois, Indiana, Tennessee, Virginia. I mean, it's not just California and it's not just New York. So they'll get some examples of what's known as comprehensive sexuality education. And that's the bad strain of education we have today. So you'll get real examples. Then you'll get an explanation of who is behind this new trend in sex ed. There are some major, rich, powerful international players that are all getting in on the sex ed business because it's such a powerful way to change the culture. And so they're using sex ed to change the culture. We explain, we name them, we talk about what their angles are. And then we focus a lot on the biggest change to sex ed in the recent decade, and that is this LGBT normalization and the transgender ideology mandates. So there's a significant portion of the book is on that. That's really the game changer. And then we give families and we give policymakers some ideas at the end from action steps. 5 things you can do right now to protect your kids and help change your school. And we give a resource for good sex ed programs, and there are good sex ed programs out there, and where you can find them. So we try to give some help at the end.
Wow, well, that's awesome. What a great roadmap. I just want to remind people that this booklet is available on our website, truthandliberty.net under the resources tab, and you can actually download that PDF and print it out. You could even email it or snail mail it if you want to every, and I encourage everybody to do this, send it to the school board members in your area, because I suspect that most of them probably are not aware fully of the agenda here. Cathy, you tell us what is going on in sex ed, if you can. Just kind of, if you would summarize for us, what is it that our kids are being taught in this comprehensive sex ed?
Yep. Well, the biggest, something that's brand new that people don't expect. We think about what we experienced when we went through sex ed in school. It's nothing like that today. One of the biggest changes is the idea of the concept of sexual rights for children. And I'm not kidding. So that's really pushed the idea that children have sexual agency and sexual rights that they can and should be able to exercise. It's disgusting that they have the right to explore various sexual identities, to try to find out what their true sexual identity is. This idea of creating or shaping or finding your identity is woven through sex ed. It's very unsettling for children. And then, of course, the LGBT focus. So, for example, Planned Parenthood claims to be the largest sex ed provider in the country. And they love to use same-sex role-playing in their sex ed lessons. I don't even think I can read this to you. I do have slides when I give this talk in person. But the idea is for a 7th grade lesson, and I'll just skip over, I can't read it verbatim, I'm too embarrassed. But so children are asked to read a scenario where there's a girl and her girlfriend, and the girlfriend wants to have a certain kind of sex act with her, but she's not sure if she's ready, but she doesn't want to break up with her girlfriend, and on and on and on. They love to do same-sex scenarios for children to read, just to bombard their reality, right? And what children think of when they think about a relationship. So when you think about a relationship, your mind doesn't immediately go to a same-sex relationship. So Planned Parenthood is making sure that these children's minds do go there. They go there a lot. We had a situation where 9th grade girls in a very rural county in Virginia were shown a video prepared by a Planned Parenthood activist, teaching girls how to pleasure their sex partners with very graphic examples, and encouraging these precious 13-year-old girls to explore sex toys. It's outrageous, and it's not only in Virginia. Let me give you another shocker. The idea of sexual consent. Consenting to sex is now a subject that is being taught in sex ed.
Yeah,
now
it's how to, right? How to consent.
It's how to consent to sex. Now, it is the proponents will say that it is purportedly to help children avoid becoming sexual predators or victims of sexual predation. But it goes far beyond that. Parents are not buying that line. And that's because, I can read these quotes to you, the proponents of teaching consent say things like this, quote, "Consent means moving beyond refusal skills to teach young people how to ask for consent." And there's another quote that I include in the booklet, quote, "Consent education respects young people's right to sexual agency and self-determination." So this is how to consent to sex. And children, of course, in most states can't even consent to sex legally. Thank God. We still have laws against that don't recognize sexual consent on the part of certain ages, underage. But yet we're teaching them how to consent to sex in sex ed.
Right.
Go figure that.
Yeah. Yeah. So Cathy, we last year here we engaged in this battle at the Colorado State Legislature as they passed what we call here House Bill 1032. And you were talking about how parents are pleading with the school boards and all this. So we went up to the state legislature, and we had 600 people basically invade the state capitol, and we packed out 3 committee rooms from 6 o'clock in the evening until midnight, one after another, people testifying against this bill. And it did not matter what we said. It didn't matter how many people showed up. It followed, it was pretty much a party line vote, but it didn't matter, the evidence, and their minds were already made up. And the thing that shocked me from that experience was who they called as their witnesses. It was half of them were children, some of them were parents of those children, and then they had a couple of, like quote unquote clergy from, anything goes religions. And
right.
But the children, they're actually calling young teenagers to testify about how they ought to have the freedom to make their own sexual choices. And you bring up this issue of consent. Well, everybody's heard of statutory rape, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
right.
you're a lawyer. That's the law that says it doesn't matter whether the minor appeared to be willing. You cannot legally have sex with someone under a certain age because they can't legally give consent. Is that right?
Correct.
And so
exactly right.
This whole program flies in the face of that. And that's been around for who knows how long, hundreds of years probably.
Right. It makes no sense. It makes no sense legally. But again, they couch it in terms of, they don't admit that they're teaching kids how to consent to sex, but they absolutely are.
Right.
They say that, it's how to recognize consent. So if you don't have consent, you can't move forward and engage in that sex act. It's baloney. They're teaching kids how to consent to sex. And I could read you many more statements from that crowd that show really what their true purpose is. I brought a whole gang of people, including my pastor and others, to a sex ed drafting committee in Fairfax County, where we are. And I didn't know what was going to happen in particular at that meeting, but it was a good one because we got to watch the sex ed committee talk about how, we should get rid of abstinence as a goal for sex ed. That doesn't reflect the values of most kids. Why do we have to have abstinence as a goal in there? Let's take it out. And one sex ed board member or drafting committee member said, "Oh no, we have to because it's required by state law." And so they said, "Oh, all right, darn. Well, okay." So they hate having to even teach anything about abstinence, but most states do require any sex ed that's taught in public schools to teach abstinence. Now, here's how they do it though. This is how they do it in my county. The summary of the lessons say the abstinence lesson is going to teach, beginning with 7th and 8th graders, the value of abstaining from sex until marriage. So when parents read the summary, they go, "Oh, okay, wow, well, good, they're teaching." But no, when you actually go read the teacher script, it's a very different story. The teacher script says that children should make a determination whether or not to engage in sexual relations when and they're advised to wait until they are in a monogamous relationship. The word marriage isn't even mentioned in the classroom for the children. To abstain from sex until they're in a monogamous relationship. So what do you think a 13-year-old's what's the takeaway from that abstinent lesson? Well, I guess I'm supposed to wait until my next steady boyfriend or steady girlfriend. I mean, it's absolutely deceptive, but that's how they're getting around because they hate the fact that they have to have abstinence as a goal for children. Well, it's another world, really.
It's presented, if I remember from what I saw here in Colorado, it's presented explicitly as just one option, right? Abstinence is just one of many options, and you can choose whatever option you want, from same sex or now I understand some schools are going with polyamorous to transgenderism and all these other perversions and destructive choices. The teacher, if I remember right, is forbidden from expressing value judgments in the curriculum, although the whole curriculum is built around the value of whatever you want and anything goes, and it's all up to you, and here are your choices, and let us illustrate them for you. I mean, am I overstating this?
Yeah. No, you're not. It really is. I mean, if you want to name it, To me, it's sexual nihilism. It is it is really an ideology that is like a religion. And this is their creed. And that the proponents of this, actually, they treat it like a religion. My husband's actually writing a book that's entitled The New State God, that talks about what is the creed of this new God, and who are the ministers and the pastors in this new creed. And this is a creed. It's nihilism. It's Gnosticism. I want to move, if we can, kind of move ahead to the transgender problem, because that really has to do a lot with what we're just talking about now. Right. So one of the things they're teaching now all across the country to little children is that they could be born in the wrong body. And that is a horrifying message. And of course, it's a false message. It's an absolute evil message. And its ultimate fulfillment is a rejection of what's the ultimate rejection of your own body? Suicide, right? So it's a terrible, destructive concept, but this is what kids are being taught. And what happens is it comes in the guise of non-discrimination. Well, we have students that identify as transgender, and we have to make sure the school is safe for them. And in order for the school to be safe, biological boys have to be admitted to every private space of girls, bathrooms, showers. They have to be allowed on sports teams. They have to be allowed in girls' hotel rooms and overnight school trips. And if we don't have all this, then it's not a safe space. So they try to say that they talk about bullying and harassment and discrimination. Well, when that came at us in Fairfax County, we had a really smart mom who did a FOIA request to see how many complaints of bullying and harassment had actually been filed by a child who identifies as transgender. And of course, the answer was 0. There were no records that showed any complaints being filed like that. So it's just a guise to get in there and make system-wide changes. Some of the changes include forcing children and teachers to use false pronouns for trans-identified people. Now, the forced use of false pronouns is a very serious matter for anyone, but certainly for any Christian. Why? Because it forces a Christian to deny the truth that God made that God made humans male and female. So God's purposeful design is reflected in male and female humanity. So if Christians are forced to deny God's purposeful design, that is tantamount to making Christians deny God. It's a very serious matter. We cannot be forced to use false pronouns. But yet the bullies who are doing this are indeed forcing little children to use false pronouns. And it's like a declaration of affirmation of a creed that we don't believe in.
Right.
It has very religious overtones. So
Well, Cathy, I was going to throw out there, Karen, jump in here if you got something. I'm watching the clock tick down here, and I want to get in everything I can, but there is a little bit of good news on this front I want to make sure to throw out there, which I think last week or the week before, the Trump administration Department of Education announced that they are going to, in Title IX and some other education stuff, they're going to follow a traditional interpretation of Title VII, and they're not going to allow boys to participate in girls' sports. Are you aware of that decision?
Yeah, Title IX. There are lawsuits underway now by girls, especially I think it's a more well-known case out of Connecticut. 3 track stars are suing girls, the Connecticut Athletic Conference, for allowing biological males to compete against them. And of course, the 2 males that are doing that, they're winning all the races. And these girls are being pushed out of any ability for scholarships, and certainly wins. So yes, the fact that the Trump administration has announced that it is going to interpret the word sex in Title IX as it has always been interpreted, which means bodily sex, not the idea that I identify as a certain sex, is great, good news. The lawsuits will still go forward. So that's not the last word, but the fact that the administration has an opinion on how to interpret this, and that's consistent with decades of interpretation of this important statute for women and girls it was great news, really great news. Because what happens when biological males compete against women is it kills women's sports.
Right.
So transgender activists are killing sports for half of the human race.
Wow.
And that's not fair. They don't care about fair, but that's not fair. And so that was nice. That was a nice development last week or a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
Richard and Cathy, I do have a question. And, this is alarming. Any parent and grandparent, and certainly something completely different than what we grew up with when we went to school. But at what point, if the public school system is taking on these absolutely radical views, this is one example of it, but there's multiple things that are being really driven into the public school system. At what point, as Christian parents, are we really obligated to find an alternative for education? And at what point, if this continues, will the public school system really no longer exist?
Right. Very good question. Before COVID, the percentage was 86%. 86% of American families sent their kids to public schools. It's a really high number. And that's after the great success of homeschooling for the last 20 years. We still had an overwhelming majority of American kids in public schools. Of course, we all know that's starting to shift now, and that is only to the good. I don't think we have good numbers right now because it's still in flux, really. But as many as 40% of families who are public school families have said they are considering homeschool now. Because of online learning, primarily, they don't like that, understandably. But they're also either wittingly or unwittingly saving their children from this poison too when they do that. So I think this is all going to change. But yes. Christian parents have to save their children. They have to rescue their children from this. This is such a destructive ideology, especially the transgender ideology. The Nehemiah Institute does very interesting research on Christian worldview, and they've done it for many years. And what they have found, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it's absolutely shocking that children from Christian families, and these are families that hold a Christian worldview, if they send their kids to public schools, the overwhelming majority, it's something like 90% of those Christian children will reject a Christian worldview after 12 or 13 years of public schools, despite the best efforts of their families, despite, having a strong church life. No. Even the families that send their kids that are out of the public system and in a private, it could be even a religious school, but if it doesn't have a strong Christian worldview, they too will lose it and reject their Christian beliefs after 12 or 13 years. I mean, it just stands to reason. If we hand our children over for 7 to 8 hours a day for 13 years to an institute who has views that are diametrically opposed to our own views in many respects, what do we think is going to happen?
Right.
I mean, we used to have many more shared views in this country. And so public school wasn't such a, it wasn't like another world. It wasn't a divergent world. There were many more shared views, but regrettably today, we just don't have a lot of common ground when it comes to some of these fundamental questions and beliefs. So it's just a different scenario today.
Well, Cathy, we've got a lot of questions coming in, and we want to get to those in a minute. But before we do, I'd like for you to take a minute and talk about, you've been in the trenches now at your local school board. So you're experienced from Congress all the way down to the local community. How can parents and grandparents and concerned citizens get involved to make a difference on this subject at the local school and school board level?
Well, that's a great question, and I have five quick ideas and suggestions. The first is find out who the good guys are on your school board. I wasn't focused on the school board. I didn't know even how many school board members we had, when they met, who they were. You got to know, even if your kids don't go to that school, because this is the body that's shaping your community, your city, our nation. These are the people. So you got to know who they are and find out who the good ones are. It's not too hard. You'll find out. Once you kind of scratch the surface, you'll see who the good ones are, and then go meet them and thank them and ask how you can help and tell them you're pulling for them. It was really important, I learned, to actually go and sit in the audience and let them see you. Hi, we're here. We support you. Thank you for taking the hard votes and doing the right thing against the culture and the pressure of the rest of the board. So find out, attend board meetings. And you might find that you want to run for school board. In Fairfax County, when we started fighting the transgender nonsense, we learned that only 1 out of 12 school board members even had kids in the system. You don't have to have kids in your public school system to run for school board. You don't have to be a teacher or an educator. We had real estate guys, we had a lawyer, we had other people that didn't have a special education background. So you can do it. You can run for school board. Another thing is what is not too hard to do and really, really important is to get a group of people and just review the sex ed lessons, watch all the videos, read all the teacher scripts, don't trust the summaries. We've got a group of parents and grandparents that have done that every year. It's a tough job for them out here because in Fairfax County, we have 80 hours of sex ed for every poor child in the system. Can you imagine 80? So it's a lot of stuff to go through, but they split up the grades. They review them, and then they create a little stoplight chart, red, yellow, and green. There are only a handful of green, but then they're able to share what they've learned with other parents. So on back to school nights, for instance, we'll get a gang of people at as many schools as we can and hand out the stoplight charts. And what I say is parents' rights. Who's interested in parents' rights? Because that's how you're going to know what's going on in your school. And the summaries don't do it. You've got to do it yourself. And that's a really great, so for people that don't want to necessarily stand up in front of a school board meeting, maybe don't want to run for school board, wow, you could really provide a valuable service saying, yeah, I'll help review these and give a summary of what's happening in each of these lessons. Another really important thing to do is pay attention to the culture of your school. There's a really poisonous thing that's happening in the culture of public schools, and that is the Gay Straight Alliance Clubs, which are also known as the Gender Sexuality Alliance Clubs. These are clubs that will come into your school and they'll take over the culture of your school. And these are clubs that are these big moneyed organizations that I cover in the pamphlet. They back the clubs. Even the National Education Association, the largest teachers lobby in the country, I just learned actually pays schools to set up these clubs. It's horrible. So these clubs are recruitment. They're places of recruitment into LGBT identities for these children, but they also are, they will host events and they'll put things on the school calendar like National Coming Out Day, National Pronouns Day, International Fight Homophobia Day. And so they will pressure the school to get stuff on the calendar that then all the children have to celebrate. So even if you opt your kid out of sex ed, your child has to celebrate LGBTQ week this week because the Gay Straight Alliance and their allies in the school administration are demanding that this be on the school calendar. So parents have to encourage and help their kids come up with alternatives that are positive alternatives for the culture of the school. Maybe a pure fashion club, maybe a biology club. What does biology really have to say about male and female? I don't know. There's even when I give this talk in person, I show a poster of a Gay Straight Alliance Club that is hosted every Wednesday by such and such teacher. So the teacher hosts it in her classroom and the sign says, come for games and candy. You know, they try to get the kids to come in. So why don't you just have like a games and candy club without the propaganda, right?
Right.
Start that kind of club. So be mindful and really not mindful, but attack your school's culture. And then I think I'm on 4, be the squeaky wheel. We have in the sex ed pamphlet and also online what I'm calling a universal opt-out. So every year, you don't have to wait till your school sends you the opt-out form. You send yours to them every year. Put it in so that it's in your child's school folder, that you do not give consent to your child to participate in any of this objectionable sex ed or the celebrations on the calendar or special lecturers who may come out, or any kind of special events or celebrations of Transgender Day or whatever it
That's
is.
great.
So yes, so proactively get that in there.
So you actually have an opt-out form that people can access, and can they get that on your website?
Yes, it's frc.org/opt-out.
Oh,
So
excellent.
frc.org/opt-out. And, if it doesn't fit exactly what you like, it maybe you can just amend it, but we're encouraging parents to file it every year.
Great.
And they're be on record. We know that letters like this really have an impact too. We got word from good teachers behind the scenes that schools started to scramble when they started getting letters from parents. Oh, okay. Wow, we got to watch what we're doing. And then just finally, that there are good programs for sex ed. And I encourage people to visit the website Ascend, which is ASCEND.org. They don't create sex ed curricula, but they compile it and they provide the research showing which ones are effective and which ones are respectful. And you can take that list to your school board or to your state council.
Great. And that was ASCEND.org?
Ascend.org.
Ascend.org. All right. Well, great. Well, Cathy, we got a lot of questions coming in from some of our viewers, and let's go ahead and transition to that. And let's see what's on people's mind here. Karen, you got some questions?
We sure do. We have got a lot of questions coming in here. And this is a really interesting one. It's coming in from Hugh Beals on chat. And the question is there a sex education curriculum that I can suggest to my local school superintendent?
Right. Well, I would say go to ascend.org, and you will see a couple dozen different programs that are in use right now throughout the country that are recommended for promoting abstinence. Although the new improved phrase for abstinence, sex ed, is sexual risk avoidance. So that's what you'll see a lot of, sexual risk avoidance. That is the good kind of sex ed. Comprehensive sex ed, that's the bad kind of sex ed. So Ascend will show you all these programs and really what their success rate is, which is really important. So go there, look at the list, take the whole list to your school board. Why aren't we using one of these? Get enough families to do that, and you might get a response.
That's great. And to follow up with that, are the decisions on what curriculum to use, is it all held at the local level?
Great question. Yes and no. Yes, it used to all be pretty much at the school board level, which gave parents, theoretically anyway, a lot of power to voice their concerns. State legislatures are starting to pass state laws. So a top-down mandate that mandates that public schools include LGBT history and the like. So there, and that prevents parents from opting their kids out of those classes or those lessons. So most sex ed is still controlled by the school board, but like in Virginia, for instance, and we've seen this elsewhere, certainly California, now our states, by state law, it is mandated that public schools have to teach queer history, basically. So, of course, I believe that you can still opt out of that. The school is not going to say, oh, you can opt out of it, but you have a constitutional right to direct the education and upbringing of your children. And you can claim the Constitution. You can say, my child's not going to be sitting in that lesson. We're going to eventually see a lawsuit on that. We haven't seen one yet, but I predict we will see one maybe soon. And I think that the parents will be victorious because those are rights, that those are based in religious liberty and the right to raise your children as you see fit. So it's a mixed bag.
Okay, thank you. This is coming in from Judith St. Lou, who is on chat. And Judith says, how can one divorced parent stop transgender transition for their young child when the other divorced parent is pushing for it?
That is a cutting edge issue. And I just last weekend met a father who was in that very circumstance in Texas. And he is fighting to protect his child, his son, from being transitioned by his ex-wife into a girl. So you need to lawyer up if you're ever if you know anybody in that situation. And I'm sorry to say that we haven't seen 100% success in protecting your child. In fact, there are a couple of cases where the parent who is trying to protect the child from being transitioned, which is, of course, a medical impossibility, but by being abused in that way, so tragic cases that have gone the wrong way. This is an area of the law that's still developing. So we're in the middle of figuring out where the law is going to go in this area.
Okay, thank you. This is from Johnny on Facebook, and he says, how do you fight the state school system if they won't give a parent a syllabus?
Okay. We have seen some success for parents in that regard. The Thomas More Law Society won a lawsuit. I think it was actually an injunction out in Colorado, possibly, where the school was keeping the online materials private, away from. They weren't letting parents in to see what the students were being taught and were having access to, and they were able to make the school open it up to the parents. So that's a winner. But I would contact a lawyer, a legal group like the Thomas More Law Society or Alliance Defending Freedom, and there are other specific legal. Christian Legal Society might have some recommendations for you as well. But basically, these school boards and these school system need to get letters from lawyers saying that they need to open up to the parents. They're not going to do it voluntarily, so they need to kind of be threatened legally.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is just disturbing. It's really discouraging to hear some of this, but yet I am so grateful that there are things in place and there's answers for people. And I think a lot of people have felt really helpless. So this is actually very encouraging to find those solutions and those next steps. This is from Reapa Cheap on chat. And the question is, do you think the nomination and confirmation of Mrs. Barrett will help in the effort to change our school indoctrination direction?
Well, I surely hope and pray that Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed, and I believe that she will be, because curriculum is traditionally a local issue. I don't know of a role necessarily that the Supreme Court would play. There is something called the Equality Act that Democrats on the Hill are trying to get passed. And the Equality Act, many analysts believe that it could actually affect curriculum at your local school. The Equality Act would erase in law any differences between male and female, for instance. So it's a big threat to women in particular, and girls on all kinds of different levels. But many scholars believe that it would actually dictate the erasure of male and female in public school curricula. So if that law were to pass, and if it were to be challenged, and if it were to be reviewed by the Supreme Court, then in that way, it's possible that the Supreme Court could weigh in on local curriculum. So it's kind of there's not a direct role for the Supreme Court that I see in curriculum, but if the Equality Act were to pass. Now, if the Equality Act were to pass, President Trump has already announced he would veto it, which is fantastic. But down the road, it could be a different story.
I want to jump in here for a second, Cathy, and this goes back to something just on that question of, will Amy Coney Barrett's nomination affect this issue? I think as as Christians and conservatives, a lot of times, like your whole story demonstrates this, we are too focused on the national level, and we do not realize the importance of what's going on right under our noses here at the local level and at the state legislature. And
Yes.
and the good news about that is that that's an area where we can actually make a difference just by getting involved, just by showing up at a school board meeting, or by calling your local state representative, or whatever the case may be. Your voice has a lot more power there than it does calling a senator who represents the whole state, or the president, or hoping that maybe some Supreme Court justice might rule on this issue, which really isn't even hardly under their jurisdiction or review. I wanted to mention for our viewers something. We checked that website, and I think it's actually weascend.org, WEASC. There we go. We've got it up now. So for
Thank
those
you.
No worries. Believe me, I understand. So anybody who wants to check that website out, it's weascend.org. So I think we've got time for maybe one more question here. Karen, you got any more that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. We have lots of questions. This one is a question I'm seeing come through multiple times, and it is from a guest, and it says is this curriculum isolated to public schools, or has it become mandatory at private, charter, and or homeschooling? And what can we do to ensure it doesn't reach the private education sphere?
Well, great question. Really good question. Well, those are three different, I would say it is making its way into charter schools. Not all, but some. Charter schools are so much closer to public schools, but run by a smaller local affiliate. So charter schools don't have the independence, of course, that a private school has. I can tell you that my own all-girls Christian school where my daughters go, that school is receiving this kind of propaganda from these groups that they need to push, teach queer history and all this stuff. Now, my school rejected it. They didn't even consider it. But if it's going to every private school in the country, there are going to be some that are going to be susceptible. There are, but homeschool really is the place where you can control the curriculum, you can control the messages, you can shape the teaching of human sexuality to the truth of God's beautiful design about human sexuality and marriage. So really, homeschool is a place where you have control. And I don't know of any state that has been able to, any state that has been able to force homeschoolers to teach this rot. I don't know of any of that. But then the place to go if you are ever pressured in that direction is the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, HSLDA. I think I've got that one right. Yeah. Homeschool Legal Defense Association. They will protect families from this kind of intrusion into their rights.
Well, Cathy, thank you for that. We've got about 45 seconds left here before we have to wrap this up. This program airs on the CTN network, and so we've got to keep it to a strict 58 minutes and 30 seconds. But it's been so great having you on the show, and I've got like 15 more questions. I know we've got a bunch more, so we'll probably have to have you back. But what an amazing educational event this was. If folks want to get in touch with you, they can do that at, if we could put her website up there again. And then also, if you want a copy of the pamphlet that Cathy has written on sex indoctrination in schools, just go to truthandliberty.net under the resources page. And with that, we'll say goodnight. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Cathy, thank you for being our guest, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thank you.
Join us next time for the Truth and Liberty broadcast. Find tonight's episode and related articles and links at truthandliberty.net. Truth and Liberty is viewer supported. If you'd like to help us continue our live casts, you can make a donation at truthandliberty.net.